The fog came in off the timber country, the way it always does in early October in that part of Arkansas. Not all at once. Piece by piece. It started at the tree line, crept across the shoulders of the road, swallowed the yellow center line, and then just kept going, until there was nothing left but two pale ribbons of wet asphalt disappearing into white at both ends. By 6 in the morning, State Highway 27 had stopped being a road and become something else entirely. A suggestion, a rumor of a road, the kind of place where the world felt like it was holding its breath and waiting for something to happen. Cole Drummond had ridden this stretch 100 times, maybe more. 18 years as an Army Ranger had taught him to read terrain the way other men read newspapers quickly, efficiently, with the specific attention of someone who understands that the difference between information and ignorance can be measured in seconds. He knew every curve on this highway, every place the fog lifted for 30 seconds before the trees closed in again, every grade change that could catch a rider who wasn't paying attention. He rode point on a 4-bike convoy heading south toward Fort Smith for a chapter officers' meeting, and he was watching the road the way 2 decades of hard places had taught him to watch roads. Not just for what was there, for what shouldn't be. That discipline, that specific kind of attention, is the only reason he saw her when he did. She came out of the fog the way lost things come out of the dark. Not all at once. First a shape wrong-sized and wrong time for that road at that hour. Then a sound barely audible over the low rumble of 4 Harley engines. A wet slapping rhythm on the asphalt. Uneven, desperate. The sound of someone who had been running long past the point where running made sense, long past the point where the body had any right to keep going, but was going anyway because the alternative was something the mind refused to accept. Then the shape became a child. A small girl in a torn, dusty rose dress, dark hair plastered across her face by the fog and the effort of running. Arms pumping with the mechanical determination of someone who has stopped feeling their legs and is simply willing them forward on principle. And her feet. Her bare feet leaving small dark prints on the wet asphalt with every step. Slap, scrape, slap. A rhythm that had been going for 40 minutes already and had not stopped. Cole's hand went up before the thought was fully formed. 3 bikes behind him responded in under a second. Engines cut. The sudden silence after all that noise felt like a held breath, like the moment before weather changes. And still she came. Slap, scrape, slap. Until she reached the front wheel of his motorcycle, and her legs simply stopped working. Not gradually. All at once, the way things stop when the last reserve runs out. She went down to her knees on the wet asphalt. Cole Drummond was already off the bike. He didn't run to her. He moved quickly, but without urgency in his posture, the practiced approach of a man who has extracted people from bad situations before and understands that the fastest way to lose a frightened person's trust is to come at them like a problem to be solved. He crouched, not kneeled, kept himself lower than her eye level. His right hand moved toward her wrist, not grabbing, just touching. 2 fingers light as a question, and he felt what was there. The rope burns were raw and purple-red in the gray morning light. The skin broken in 3 places on her left wrist, the color of an injury that had been done to her hours ago and not treated once since. His face didn't change. He had learned a long time ago in places where expressions could cost lives to keep his face a still surface regardless of what was moving underneath it. He looked up at her. Brown eyes red-rimmed from hours of effort, not from crying. That was the first thing he noticed. She hadn't been crying. She was looking at him with an expression he had only seen a handful of times in his life, the expression of someone who has processed the worst thing and come out the other side into a place of absolute clarity. The expression of someone who has made every calculation available to them and arrived at a conclusion, and is now simply waiting to see if the conclusion holds. Around her neck, on a length of blue paracord, hung a small brass house key, tarnished at the edges, worn smooth at the center from years of being handled. The kind of key that had been touched 10,000 times by the same careful hands. It swung outward slightly as she settled on her knees, catching what little light the fog allowed for just a fraction of a second. A small cold flash in all that gray. She looked at him for one long moment. The way people look when they are deciding whether the person in front of them has earned the next sentence. Then she said it. They hung my mom on a tree. 7 words, clear as a report, flat as fact, delivered with the precision of someone who had been saving those exact words for the exact right person and was now finally saying them. Cole said 3 words back. Show me where. He didn't pause, didn't qualify, didn't reach for comfort or context or any of the soft machinery people use to cushion bad information. He simply said the only 3 words that mattered, and while he said them, he lifted her to his hip in one motion, not roughly, not with the clinical efficiency of a man managing a situation, but with the practiced carry of someone who has taken people out of bad places before, a carry that said without any words at all, I have you. His left hand rested open on her back, not gripping, just present. A contact that said he was not going to put her down until they got to where they were going, and that where they were going was wherever she said it was. Behind him, Walt Greer road name Doc was already off his bike with a medical kit in his hand. Ned Alcott road name Shepard moved up on Cole's left without being asked, falling into step with the quiet ease of a man who understood how to be useful without requiring instruction. Owen Tate, the youngest of them, 21 years old, road name Cypher, was on his phone scanning for signal bars in the fog. Frank Briggs, a road name, Hardin, stood at the tree line with his old county credentials already in his breast pocket. By pure muscle memory, his eyes moving between the child and the darkness between the pines, with the focus of a man who has been reading crime scenes for 22 years and cannot stop seeing them everywhere he looks. Cole looked at the tree line. The pines stood dark and still in the fog, their trunks disappearing upward into white. Somewhere in there, a woman was still hanging. He looked back at Riley. Can you show us the trail? She pointed at the tree line. Her arm steady, her hand steady. It's through there. And they moved. What happened in the 40 minutes before that foggy morning on State Highway 27 begins 9 months earlier in the summer, in a way that things like this almost always begin. Not with violence, with paperwork. With a handshake and a pressed shirt, and a man who understood that the most efficient way to control a person is not to threaten them, but to help them. Diane Voss was 34 years old when her right hand got caught in the feed mechanism of a debarking machine at Millhaven Lumber. The injury was severe. 3 surgeries over 6 weeks, 8 months of physical therapy ahead of her, a workers' compensation settlement that after 2 years of proceedings came out to $247,800. It was more money than Diane had ever seen in her life. More money than her parents had ever seen. And she was still on Percocet 3 days out of her 3rd surgery when Warren Gould first knocked on her door. Warren Gould was 54 years old. He had lived in Millhaven his entire life. He coached Little League on Saturday mornings and chaired the food bank board, and had been the neighborhood watch captain for the county district covering the west side of town for 17 years. He was the kind of man who showed up at every community meeting and remembered every name and shook every hand with the right amount of pressure. The kind of man who made people feel simply by being in a room that the room was in good hands. He introduced himself to Diane as a community advocate. He had a folder with him. He had done this, he said, for many families in difficult situations. There was a management structure. He explained that helped people in Diane's position protect their settlement funds from predatory financial products, ensure the money lasted. Keep it insulated from outside interference. He said all of this in the measured, unhurried voice of a man who has never needed to rush because he has never been seriously challenged. He sat at Diane's kitchen table and drank the coffee she made despite her bandaged hand, and spoke for 40 minutes about protection and stability and her daughter's future. Diane signed the management agreement 3 days later. Her hand was shaking when she signed it. Not from nervousness, from the Percocet and the nerve damage, and the fact that her right hand had been reconstructed by a surgeon 6 days earlier. The pen kept slipping. Gerald Fitch, the attorney. Warren had recommended a man who had gone to high school with Warren in the same building 35 years ago steady the paper for her. He had driven out from his office on County Road 7 in a good suit and had been professional and patient, and had explained the document in broad terms. He did not explain page 4. He did not explain the clause on page 4 that transferred management authority over the full settlement, including the estate value of those funds, in the event of Diane's incapacitation or death. He did not explain it because Warren had not instructed him to explain it. And Gerald Fitch, for $6,000 in cash delivered 3 days after the signing, had decided that what he didn't say wasn't the same as what he lied about. The management agreement was legal, aggressive but legal. And with that single signature on that single afternoon with a shaking hand, and a mind still blurred by pain medication and relief, that the worst of the surgeries was finally done, Diane Voss handed Warren Gould control over the only financial security she had ever possessed. What followed was 9 months of quiet patient suffocation. Warren did not take the money immediately. That was not how he worked. He took it in pieces in management fees and administrative costs and processing charges that were all on paper accounted for. He built the documentation carefully, the way a man builds something he intends to survive scrutiny. And while he did, he kept Diane close, not with affection, with access. He remained her community advocate. He attended the meetings with the physical therapy office. He drove her to her second follow-up appointment and waited in the parking lot and walked her back to her car afterward. He made sure she understood without ever saying it directly that he was aware of every part of her life. Every time Diane tried to reach outside the walls closing around her, she found she couldn't. The CPS caseworker arrived on a Tuesday afternoon at the exact hour Warren had told her to expect it, because Warren had a contact in the intake coordinator's office and had received the scheduling notification that morning. He met the caseworker at the front door as Diane's community advocate gave her a tour of the house that he and Dex Pruitt had spent the previous afternoon staging and cleaning, while Diane stood in her own kitchen and did not speak because Dex had made the cost of speaking very clear. The case was closed in 2 days. The note in the file said, "Home assessed no immediate concerns." The sheriff's deputy who took Diane's report about the management agreement listened carefully, typed while she spoke, then put his hands flat on the desk and explained that signing a legal document while on prescription medication did not automatically constitute fraud, and that she could face counter-accusations if she pursued it incorrectly. He was Warren's fishing partner. He had been for 12 years. The school counselor who noticed bruising on Riley's forearm called the parent contact number in the school system. Warren had changed that number to a burner phone 6 weeks earlier. He answered, thanked the counselor for her diligence, mentioned a soccer practice fall, and the note added to Riley's file reflected an explained injury with no follow-up required. Every door led back to Warren, not because he was exceptional, because he was everywhere. Because for 17 years, a neighborhood watch captain in that county had been granted a county-issued radio with access to incoming incident traffic. Not a full police radio, but close enough. Close enough that reports filed at the sheriff's department calls made to CPS labor board inquiries. All of it generated radio traffic that Warren Gould heard within hours of the paperwork being filed. Every time Diane reached for help, he knew before the ink was dry. The system was not broken. A broken system can be fixed. This one was working exactly as it had been designed for the wrong person, and nobody had audited the lock in 17 years. Riley Voss understood this before any adult in her life articulated it. She was 8 years old. She did not have the vocabulary for what she was watching. But she had something that vocabulary cannot replace, which is the specific, finely calibrated attention of a child who has learned that the mood in a room can change before the adults in the room have shown anything on their faces. She had been reading her mother's silences for 9 months. She knew the difference between the silence of a woman who is tired and the silence of a woman who has stopped believing there is anyone left to call. She knew that every time her mother came home from somewhere she had gone to ask for help, the silence was a little deeper, and the space between Diane's shoulder blades was a little more rigid, and the hand that touched Riley's hair before bed was a little more careful, like touching something she was afraid of losing. Riley knew something was wrong with Warren Gould long before she knew what wrong meant in the specific legal sense. She knew it the way children know things, from the way a room changed temperature when he walked into it, from the way her mother's posture shifted into something smaller whenever he was nearby, from the way his eyes moved when he thought nobody was watching, from the particular quality of his attention, which was not the attention of someone who cares about people. It was the attention of someone for whom people are a problem to be managed. She started going to her room whenever Warren came to the house. She had been doing this for months before the night at the firehouse. She did it quietly without explanation, the way children do things they understand instinctively, even when they can't explain the instinct. The night at Fire Station 4 was a fundraiser for the volunteer department. Diane went because Warren had suggested it, which by that point meant Diane went because not going would have required an explanation, and explanations had costs. Riley went because there was nowhere else for her to be. She sat with the other children during the dinner. Portion ate the food, watched the adults move around the room with the careful, interested observation of a child who has learned that adults reveal more than they realize when they think they are only being watched by other adults. By 9 in the evening, the children were gathered in a corner near the back of the main hall with a stack of board games and the general understanding that the adults were going to be there a while longer. Riley found a spot behind the furnace room door, leaned against the warm wall, and somewhere in the third hour of the evening fell asleep to the muffled sound of voices and the distant smell of engine oil and cold metal. She woke up to silence. The main hall was mostly empty. The overhead lights had been dimmed, and from the office at the back of the station, through a door that had been pulled nearly shut, she could hear two voices. One of them was Warren's. She recognized his measured pace, the unhurried cadence of a man who has never needed to rush. The other voice was Dex Pruitt's, lower and rougher. The voice of a man who was used to receiving instructions rather than giving them. Riley did not move. She did not breathe more than she had to. She had learned without being taught that being still and small is sometimes the same thing as being safe. She heard Warren say that Diane had filed with the labor board in August about the $247,800. He said this the way he said everything calmly, as though the information was simply data to be processed rather than a person's desperate attempt to save herself. He said he had been patient. He said that was over. He told Dex to make it visible. He said to leave the girl tied nearby because witnesses scare themselves. Then Warren said a name Riley had never heard. Aaron Briggs. He said it the same way he said everything else, without heat, without hesitation. He said Aaron Briggs wasn't a problem anymore. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice had the specific flat finality of a man closing a door on something. He said, "Neither will she be." Riley lay behind the furnace room door and looked at the ceiling and did not move. She understood in the wordless cellular way that children understand danger, that she had heard something she was not supposed to hear. She understood that the something was about her mother. She understood that the man saying it was capable of doing exactly what he was describing, because she had been watching him for 9 months, and she knew what lived behind that careful, unhurried smile. She did not know what had happened to Aaron Briggs. She did not know the specific mechanics of what Warren was planning. But she knew enough to understand that telling anyone in Millhaven was the same as telling Warren. She had watched her mother try that 4 times. She had watched every door close. She had watched the silence after each closed door go a little deeper. She also understood with the clarity that fear sometimes produces in the very young that she needed someone from completely outside, someone the radio couldn't reach, someone who owed Warren Gould nothing and knew nobody he knew. She waited. She waited 20 days, carrying every word of that conversation inside her, repeating it to herself in the dark each night before sleep, the way other children repeat multiplication tables. Every word, every pause, the name Warren said, and the way he said it. She did not allow herself to forget a single syllable because she understood without being told that what she had heard was the only proof that existed. On the fourth night, after Warren and Dex came to the house after Diane was taken, and the pine tree and the nailhead, and the 40 minutes that followed after Riley had run 2 kilometers in the dark navigating by the sound of the highway through fog so thick she could hold it in her fist, she came out of the tree line onto State Highway 27 and saw the headlights, 4 sets of them moving south, the low rumble of engines, the specific sound of Harley-Davidson motorcycles which she knew from the county fair 3 years ago when a group of riders had stopped for gas and her mother had let her look at the bikes up close. She stopped in the road. She looked at the approaching lights. She had been running for 40 minutes. Her feet had stopped hurting somewhere around the 20-minute mark, which was not a good sign. And she knew it wasn't a good sign, even if she didn't know exactly why. Her right knee had a deep scrape from a fall on a route she hadn't seen in the dark. The rope burns on her wrists made contact with anything pure agony. She had a bruise at her left temple, old and greenish at the center, from when Dex had shoved her against the doorframe during the initial capture 4 days ago. She was 8 years old, and she was alone on a highway in the dark in the fog, and she chose. Not from desperation, not from the absence of options. She chose with the same deliberate, calculated awareness she had been exercising for 3 weeks. These men were strangers. They had nothing to do with Millhaven. They had no connection to Warren Gould. They were passing through, which meant they were exactly what she needed. Not the safest looking thing on the road, not the most obvious choice, but the right one. She stepped into the center of the lane. The lead rider saw her at a distance that suggested he had been watching the road with a level of attention that was not ordinary. He had his hand up before the bikes began to slow, the signal precise and immediate, and then the engines cut, and the sudden silence was enormous. And Riley felt the cold come in off the timber country and settle into her wet dress, and she kept walking forward, because stopping now was not something she was willing to do. She reached the front wheel of the lead motorcycle, and her legs stopped working. The man who came off the bike moved the way men move when they have done difficult things many times and have learned that economy is more useful than speed. He crouched. He got himself lower than her eye level. She registered that. She registered it in the part of her that had been cataloging how adults moved around frightened people and noting which of them instinctively understood that looming was a threat. He touched her wrist, 2 fingers light as a question. She looked at him. He was big in the way that men who have worked very hard in hard places are big, not a statement but a result. His face was the face of someone who had seen bad things and processed them into something functional rather than something paralyzing. He had gray at the temples and a road name on the leather cut that said Ironside. And he was looking at her not with the expression of a man trying to decide what to make of her situation, but with the expression of a man who had already decided and was waiting for the information he needed to act on the decision. She looked at the men behind him, one with a medical kit already in his hand, one moving up on the left with the particular ease of someone practiced at being present without being intrusive. One young one on his phone scanning for signal. One older one at the tree line already looking at the pines with an expression that was impossible to fully read. She looked back at the man in front of her. He had seen what was around her neck. She could tell from the way his eyes had moved to the brass key on the paracord and then back to her face. Her mother had put it there every morning before school, looped the blue cord over Riley's head, and pressed the key once against her sternum and said the same thing she always said. So you're never locked out, no matter what. Riley made her decision. They hung my mom on a tree. He said 3 words, no hesitation, no pause, no flinching, no reaching for the soft packaging that most adults wrap hard information in before they can handle it. Show me where. He lifted her to his hip in one motion. His left hand rested open on her back, not pinning, not gripping, just present. A contact that said, without any words at all, that he was not going to put her down until they got to where they were going, and that where they were going was wherever she said it was. He looked at the tree line. Can you show us the trail? Riley pointed. It's through there. She felt him nod. She felt the shift in his weight as he turned toward the trees. Behind them, she heard the other men moving. She heard the one with the medical kit fall into step behind them. She heard the one at the tree line begin speaking quietly into a phone, his voice low and carrying the specific weight of a man, describing a situation to someone who will understand immediately what it means. She did not look back at the highway. She did not look at the motorcycle sitting dark and still in the fog. She looked at the tree line and the darkness beyond it, and she held the brass key in her free hand cold against her palm, and she thought about her mother hanging in the dark. They went into the pines. The cold inside the tree line was a different kind of cold than the cold on the highway, denser, wetter. The fog gathered in the canopy and dripped from the needles in a slow, irregular percussion, and the pine smell was sharp and clean in the back of the throat. And the trail was not much of a trail, more a memory of direction than an actual path. And Riley navigated it by something she couldn't have named, a combination of muscle memory and the faint geographic logic of a child who had grown up near these woods. The man carrying her didn't speak. He moved. He kept pace with her pointing hand, adjusting direction without questioning it, trusting her navigation the way experienced people trust the person who actually knows the terrain. Behind him, she could hear the others moving with a discipline she had not expected. No stumbling, no unnecessary sound. They moved through the dark forest like men who were comfortable in difficult places and had no interest in advertising their presence. At some point, the one who had moved up on the left said quietly, his voice just above the level of the dripping pines, I'm Shepherd. I'm not going anywhere. He didn't ask her anything. He didn't say anything else. He just told her his name and told her he was staying. Riley heard it. She didn't respond. She kept pointing. Cole had been an Army Ranger for 18 years. And in those 18 years, he had seen what happens to people when the systems that are supposed to protect them fail. He had seen it overseas in the specific way that institutional failure looks when it operates at scale. He had seen it at home in the particular way it looks when it operates quietly in small towns, in the spaces between what is documented and what is known. He had seen it most personally in the fall of 2009, in a way that had reorganized everything about how he moved through the world afterward. His son Tyler had been 8 years old when Cole received his last overseas deployment. The arrangement worked out with the state system before Cole shipped out was that Tyler would be in a licensed foster placement for the duration. Cole had checked everything he could check. He had been told Tyler was safe. He had been told the placement was stable. He had been told to focus on the mission and that everything at home was being handled. Cole came home 11 months later to a death certificate that said natural causes and a caseworker who said these things sometimes happen, and a grave that had been dug and filled, while Cole was on the other side of the world, trusting people whose job it was to be trustworthy. He had spent 17 years trying to understand what to do with that. Not the grief which was structural, now built into the load-bearing parts of him, and inseparable from how he stood upright. He had made a kind of peace with carrying the grief. What he had needed to understand was what to do with the attention that the grief had produced. The specific, heightened, permanent attention to children who needed someone paying attention. He had not been able to go back to Tyler. He could show up to every road that looked like it. He was walking through the Arkansas pines at 6:20 in the morning with a child on his hip who had run 2 kilometers barefoot in the dark rather than trust a single adult in her town. And he was thinking about this in the way he always thought about it, not as something to be examined, but as something to be used. He thought about it when he felt her weight shift slightly, the unconscious relaxing of a child who is very tired and has decided at some level below thought that the person carrying her is not going to drop her. He thought about it when he looked down and saw that her eyes were still open and still alert and still watching the trail ahead, with the focused intensity of someone who has not yet allowed themselves to believe that the worst is over. She was right not to believe that yet. The worst was not over until he saw Diane Voss alive. "There," Riley said. She pointed at a gap in the pines ahead where the trees opened into something lighter, a clearing where the fog lay thinner and the gray morning light came down without obstruction. Cole heard Harden Frank Briggs moving up behind him. He heard Doc's kit shifting. He heard Shepard fall back slightly, staying close to Cole and Riley, without crowding into whatever came next. They stepped into the clearing. They found Diane Voss at 6:39 in the morning. She was exactly where Riley said she would be, in a clearing, where the pines opened around one enormous old oak, its lowest branch 4 meters off the ground. The rope was good climbing rope doubled over the branch. The loops around her wrists were bearing her full weight. She weighed 109 pounds, 9 months of managed food access, having taken its toll in a way that didn't fully register until you actually looked. Her hands were purple-blue. Her lips were the color of a winter sky. Her chest was moving, shallow, wrong rhythm, but moving. Riley stopped at the edge of the clearing. She did not go further. She stood with both hands at her sides and looked at her mother and did not make a sound. The brass key was cold in her palm. Doc had 2 fingers to Diane's throat before the rest of them were fully into the clearing. He counted. He looked at Cole. "Pulse is weak. Core is at 92, maybe lower. We have 25 minutes, maybe 30. Cole was already at the base of the tree. Hardin stepped up beside him without a word. Shepard moved to the edge of the clearing where Riley was standing and sat down on a root beside her, not touching her, not speaking. Just present the way you are present beside someone who needs a witness rather than a conversation. Doc was already cutting rope. The sound of the field knife working through the climbing line was very clean in the cold air. Riley watched. Cole glanced at her from the base of the tree. He looked at her for a moment, and then he crossed the clearing to where she was standing. He crouched beside her lower than her eye level, and he looked at her directly. He did not say everything was going to be fine. He was not a man who said things he couldn't guarantee. He said, "Your mother is still here, which means we're not too late. My men are going to get her down right now. Nobody's taking her anywhere except somewhere safe. You have my word." He said it the way people say things they mean, not quickly, not with extra weight on the words, just stated the way facts are stated. Riley looked at him. Something in her eyes shifted. Not relief, not yet, but the specific quality of something that had been held very tightly for a very long time, moving just slightly toward the possibility of release. "There's something else," she said. Her voice was the same as it had been on the highway, clear, flat, the voice of someone delivering a report. "I know what he was planning. I heard him say it 3 weeks ago at the firehouse." She paused with the precision of someone who intends to say this exactly right. "I've been saying it to myself every night so I wouldn't forget." Cole held very still. "Tell me," he said. So she did. She told him about waking behind the furnace room door. She told him about the 2 voices, Warren's and Dex's. She told him about the labor board filing about Warren's patients, running out about the instruction to make it visible to leave the girl tied nearby because witnesses scare themselves. And then she told him the name she had not understood and had not forgotten. Aaron Briggs. She told him exactly what Warren had said about Aaron Briggs. The same words in the same order with the same pauses as precisely as she had rehearsed them in the dark every night for 3 weeks. When she finished, the clearing was very quiet except for the sound of Doc working and the drip of fog from the pine canopy. Cole stood slowly. He looked across the clearing at Hardin. Hardin was already looking at him. Something moved across his face that Cole couldn't fully read at that distance, a specific internal rearrangement that had nothing to do with the situation in the clearing and everything to do with the name the girl had just said. But there wasn't time to examine it now. Cole looked at Riley. "You did the right thing," he said, "telling me that." She looked at him steadily. "I know," she said, not with arrogance, with the simple confirmation of someone who made a difficult calculation and has now received enough information to know the calculation was correct. At the base of the tree, the rope parted. Diane Voss came down. Doc and Cole caught her together and lowered her to the ground, and thermal blankets came out of the medical kit, and an IV line went into her left arm, and Doc's hands moved with the practiced economy of a man who has kept people alive in worse places than a foggy clearing in the Arkansas pines. Riley watched from the edge. Shepard sat beside her on the root. The brass key was cold in her hand. The fog held everything in soft white silence, and the pines dripped and Diane's chest rose and fell, and the IV dripped and Doc counted pulse at 3-minute intervals and called out numbers that were moving slowly in the right direction. And somewhere on the other side of the clearing, Hardin had gone very still with his phone in his hand looking at something on the screen with the expression Riley had described to Shepard an hour later from the cab of a pickup truck. The expression of a man for whom a flaw had just gone somewhere else. But Riley didn't know that yet. She knew her mother's chest was rising and falling. She knew the man who had crouched to her level on the highway had kept his word. The call took 45 seconds. Cole made it while they walked back through the pines. Riley on his hip, the trail narrowing ahead of them, the cold pushing down through the canopy in slow, heavy waves. He dialed with one hand and kept the other open on Riley's back and spoke quietly into the phone with the compressed efficiency of a man who has learned that clarity saves time and time saves lives. He said a name. He said a location. He said, "Little girl, 8 years old, her mother strung up in a forest by the man who's been stealing her workers' comp settlement." He said, "We are not waiting for the county to get around to this one." The voice on the other end took one breath. Then it said, "Say no more, we're coming." The line went dead. No questions about documentation, no deliberation about jurisdiction, no careful calculation of liability, just the sound of the call ending and the absolute certainty that it had landed, that the words had reached someone who understood what they meant and had already made the decision before the sentence was finished. That is what the word brotherhood actually means, not the patches, not the bikes, not the leather and the road names and the rituals that outsiders find either romantic or threatening, depending on what they've read and who they've met. It means when a brother says, "Now you don't ask why, you come now." By the time they cleared the tree line and came back out onto Sawmill Creek Road, the trailer was already being prepared. It was a converted enclosed trailer, the kind that looked from the outside like equipment storage, but had been built over years and with specific purpose into something else entirely. 2 fold-down cots, a heating unit, IV supplies, thermal blankets rated to well below the current temperature. A portable cardiac monitor that Doc had sourced through a contact in Fort Smith and kept maintained with the same discipline he applied to everything that might one day be the difference between someone living and someone not. Doc got Diane inside within 4 minutes of clearing the tree line. He did not leave her side. He sat on the cot beside her and watched the cardiac monitor with the focused patience of a man who has learned that the numbers either move in the right direction or they don't, and that your job in the meantime is to be ready for both outcomes. Her core temperature on arrival at the trailer was 91.4 degrees. Her wrist had been wrapped. The IV was running saline and glucose. Her pulse was weak and irregular, but it was there and it was not getting weaker, and the temperature inside the trailer was climbing above 70 degrees as the heating unit ran. Doc checked his watch every 3 minutes and wrote numbers in a small notebook and said nothing to anyone about what the numbers meant, because there was nothing useful to say until the direction became clear. Shepard got Riley into the cab of a pickup truck directly outside. Heater running, a thermal blanket over her shoulders. Hot chocolate in both hands, delivered through the window by Lyle Dodd road name Anchor, who had driven it up from a gas station a quarter-mile down the road without explanation and handed it through the window without ceremony, like delivering hot chocolate to a traumatized 8-year-old in a fog-covered truck, was something he did every Tuesday. Anchor was 60 years old and had founded the Fort Smith chapter 31 years ago. He had the particular quality of stillness that develops in certain people after a long time spent doing serious things without seeking recognition for them. The kind of stillness that is not passivity, but rather the complete absence of performance. When he walked back to where the others were gathering, he looked at the men around him and said 4 words. "We finished this right." Nobody disagreed. Riley sat in the warm cab with both hands around the cup and looked through the windshield at the men moving in the gray morning light outside. She watched them the way she had been watching adults her entire life, carefully, quietly, from a distance that felt safe. But this was different from what she was used to watching. What she was used to watching was adults managing situations. What she was seeing now was adults who had already decided something and were executing the decision with focused, unhurried precision that does not require discussion because everyone already knows their role. She watched the man called Hardin standing slightly apart from the others with his phone in his hand. He had been on the phone since they came out of the pines. She could see the set of his shoulders from the cab window. She had been reading the way adults held their bodies since she was old enough to understand that bodies told the truth when faces were lying. And the way Hardin was holding his body was the way her mother's body had looked the morning she came home from the sheriff's department and sat in the driveway for 20 minutes before coming inside. Like the floor had gone somewhere else. Shepard was in the cab beside her. He had a quiet that was different from silence. It was the quiet of someone who was fully present without requiring anything from the present moment. He didn't watch her watching. He just sat with the heater running and waited. After a while, Riley said quietly, more to herself than to Shepard, "The man out there, the one standing by himself." He stopped when he heard the name. Shepard looked through the windshield at Hardin. "He did," Shepard said. "The same way my mom stopped when she realized the money was gone," Riley said. She turned the brass key on the paracord slowly between her fingers. Like the floor went somewhere else. Shepard was quiet for a moment. "That's exactly right," he said. Riley looked back at Hardin. "He knows that name," she said. It was not a question. Shepard didn't answer immediately, which was its own kind of answer. Riley filed it and kept watching. "My mom asked for help 4 times," Riley said. "Nobody came." Shepard didn't look away from the window. "I know," he said. "These people aren't from here," Riley said. "That's why it's different." She said it again softly, confirming it to herself rather than asking him to confirm it. Shepard looked at her. "Yes," he said. "That's why it's different." At 8:45 in the morning, the first convoy arrived. They heard it before they saw it. A low sound from the south building, slowly from below the threshold of notice, into something you felt in the chest before you heard it with the ears. Engines, many of them, growing. The windows of the gas station a quarter-mile down the road vibrated faintly in their frames. A car alarm in the parking lot of First Savings of Millhaven went off and nobody went to silence it. Then they appeared out of the southern fog. 20. Then 30. Then more, their headlights materializing from the white in pairs, the sound of them arriving in rolling waves as the convoy stretched out over a quarter-mile of road. They came in off the highway onto Sawmill Creek Road, and they pulled to the shoulder in disciplined rows, kickstands, down engines cutting in sequence until the last one fell silent. And the quiet that came after all that sound was the kind of quiet that has weight. 53 motorcycles by the time the first group was fully staged. By noon, the number would reach 97. Men who had received a phone call before sunrise with almost no information, and had gotten on their bikes anyway, Because the person making the call was someone whose judgment they had trusted in conditions considerably worse than this. And because some calculations do not require detail. A brother said now, "You come now." Not one of them was shouting. Not one of them was moving without purpose. They stood beside their bikes in their leather cuts in the cold October air, and they waited because they had come to be useful. And usefulness requires knowing what the situation actually is before you move. Millhaven, Arkansas, population 4,200, had never seen anything like it. Shopkeepers came to their windows. A man walking his dog on the far end of Sawmill Creek Road turned around and went home without quite knowing why. Two deputies in the county's only morning patrol car drove past once, then came back and drove past again slowly, and both times they did not stop because Hardin was standing at the front of the formation with his hands where anyone could see them, and his old county credentials in his breast pocket, and because nothing illegal was happening, and because some part of both deputies knew on a level below policy and procedure that the men standing in that formation knew things they didn't yet. Riley watched all of this from the pickup cab. After a while she said, "Why did they come?" Shepard said, "Because Cole asked." She considered that. That's all it took. Shepard looked at the formation of men standing in the cold. He thought about how to answer that honestly. When the right person asked, he said, in the right way for the right reason. Yeah, that's all it takes. The silence that followed was not comfortable. It was not meant to be. Shepard did not reach for a way to fill it or soften it, because he understood that the most respectful thing you can do with a truth that hurts is let it be true. Owen Tate Cypher had been in the cab of the support truck since they came out of the pines. He was 21 years old and had been working in the focused, unhurried silence of someone who has a process and trusts it. He had a laptop, a portable signal booster, and a portable drive, and he did not announce anything when he found what he found. He printed 3 sheets of paper on the small printer, bolted to the support truck's interior wall, and he carried them to the hood of the nearest vehicle and laid them down without a word and stepped back. Cole read the first sheet, a text chain recovered from Dex Pruitt's phone. The deletion log showed the texts had been wiped that morning. The recovery timestamp showed they had been pulled from the phone's deleted partition. The content described in the flat operational language of men who are not worried about being overheard a specific set of actions to be taken regarding Diane Voss and the visibility of the outcome. Cole set that sheet down. He read the second sheet. A financial summary, 6 accounts, 3 shell companies, 1 registered in Missouri, 2 in Delaware. A holding entity called Crossroads Management Solutions. 47 months of deposit records in total spanning both victims, whose pattern matched every date on which payments had been diverted through Warren Gould's management structure. Cole set that sheet down. He read the third sheet. He picked it up. He held it. A second name, a second management agreement. Signed in 2019, the same format as Diane's. The same clause on page 4 in the same position in the same typeface. The same attorney's name in the notarization block. Aaron Briggs. Total extracted across 14 months from Aaron Briggs's criminal injury compensation account, $312,600. Final transfer date, March 14th, 2021. Cole looked up. He looked at Hardin. Hardin was already looking at the sheet from where he stood 3 feet away, and his face had the expression Riley had described from the pickup cab, with the precision of a child who had spent 8 years learning to read grief in adult faces. The floor going somewhere else, the specific internal collapse of a man confronting something he has been half expecting and fully dreading for a very long time. Hardin said, "Aaron Briggs was my nephew." The words came out level. He had spent 22 years as a sheriff's deputy and had learned to deliver information in a level voice regardless of what the information was doing to him internally. But his hands, which were normally still in the way that experienced law enforcement hands are still, were not moving the way they usually moved. He was 19, Hardin said. Released from a group placement in February of 2019. No family except me and my wife. I was trying to get him stable, get him working, get him a path. He paused. Warren Gould introduced himself as a community advocate. Nobody spoke. Aaron drowned, Hardin said. Crestwood Lake, March 19th, 2021, 5 days after that final transfer. He looked at the sheet. He couldn't swim. 3 witnesses confirmed he had never voluntarily been to that lake in his life. He set his hands flat on the hood of the truck. I filed an inquiry in March of 2021. It was routed for follow-up through the neighborhood watch captain's office. He paused. Warren's office. He looked at Cole. I resigned 6 months later because I could not prove what I knew, and I could not keep sitting at a desk in a building connected to the system that had killed my nephew and called it a drowning. The refrigerator unit in the support truck hummed. Somewhere down the road, a motorcycle idled briefly and cut off. Cole said, Diane has 23 days. Hardin looked at him. The estate transfer clause, Cole said. It activates in 23 days. Hardin picked up the sheet with Aaron Briggs's name on it and looked at it for a long moment. Then he set it down. Then he picked up his notebook. He had not stopped carrying a notebook in 22 years, and he was not going to stop now. Gerald Fitch's office was in a beige building on County Road 7 south of Millhaven, a small parking lot that was never more than 1/3 full, a placard by the door with his name and credentials. The office of a man who had made a careful, modest life and was very invested in the continued modesty of it. He was making coffee when Cole and Hardin came through the door. He looked at them for one long moment the way people look at unexpected arrivals when they have been waiting on some level they don't fully acknowledge for a knock that sounds exactly like this. Then he looked at the documents Hardin set on his desk, the 2 management agreements side by side. Aaron Briggs and Diane Voss. Same format, same page 4, same notarization block with Gerald Fitch's name and license number. Gerald sat down. Hardin gave him exactly one option in exactly these words. Tell me everything from the beginning, or I make one call and you explain the Aaron Briggs file to people with considerably less patience than I have. Gerald Fitch broke in under 4 minutes. He was not a predator. That is important to say clearly, not as mitigation, but as taxonomy, because understanding the specific nature of what he was matters for understanding how this kind of thing survives as long as it does. He was a coward. He had seen the structure of what Warren was doing clearly enough to understand it. And he had decided that $6,000 in cash and a professional relationship with a man who knew everyone in the county were worth more than the question he refused to ask. He told himself it wasn't his problem. He told himself someone else would catch it. He told himself that if Warren were really doing something wrong, the system would handle it. While he told himself all of that, Aaron Briggs, 19 years old, no family and no lawyer, and no one to explain what a management agreement actually meant, went into a lake he had never wanted to visit. And Diane Voss signed her name on a shaking hand and handed over the only financial security she had ever had. The people who enable do not pull the rope. They just make sure someone else is holding it. Gerald confirmed the payments. $6,000 cash each time delivered within 3 days of each signing. He confirmed the estate transfer clause had been included at Warren's specific instruction. He confirmed the clause was not standard practice. He confirmed he had known that. Hardin wrote for 3 minutes without looking up. Then he looked up. He took the agreements. He took Gerald's statement. He gave Gerald 1 hour to contact his own attorney. In the parking lot of the beige building on County Road 7 in the October air, Hardin folded his notebook and Cole looked at the road. Cole said, "We have enough." Hardin said, "We have enough for the financial charges. For everything else, we have one source." They looked at each other. "Riley," Cole said. Hardin nodded. 1 8-year-old girl, one overheard conversation. 3 weeks of recitation in the dark, no other witness, no recording, no corroboration except a dead boy and a pattern of behavior, and a text chain pulled from a deleted partition by a 21-year-old with a laptop in the back of a support truck. Riley's testimony was not one piece of the case. It was the specific, irreplaceable piece that turned a financial fraud prosecution into something with an entirely different weight. Without it, Warren Gould went to prison for what he had stolen. With it, Warren Gould went to prison for what he had planned and what he had already done to Aaron Briggs. Cole drove back to the pickup truck. He knocked on the window. Shepard lowered it. Cole looked at Riley. She was still holding the cup, though the chocolate had long since gone cold. She was watching him with the same calm assessment she had been applying to him since the highway. He said, "I need to ask you something. You don't have to do it right now, and you don't have to do it alone, and however you do it, I'm going to be right outside." Riley looked at him. "Can you tell Shepard about the night at the firehouse?" She was quiet for a moment. "I've been telling it to myself every night for 3 weeks," she said, "so I wouldn't forget." "I know," Cole said. "That's why I'm asking." She looked at him for one more moment. The same look as on the highway, the look of someone deciding whether the conclusion they have reached holds. Then she looked at Shepard. "Okay," she said. Cole stepped back from the window. Shepard raised it. The cab became its own world, warm and quiet, separate from the cold and the formation and the evidence on the hood of the truck outside. Riley put the cold cup on the dash. She looked at Shepard. He had been a school counselor for 15 years before he became something else. And in those 15 years, he had learned that the most valuable thing you can offer a child in a difficult moment is not solutions or reassurance or the performance of calm. It is attention. Real attention, undivided and without agenda, the kind that a person can feel rather than simply observe. He sat with his hands in his lap and his eyes on Riley, and he listened with everything he had. She said it. All of it. Every word of the conversation she had heard through the almost closed door of the firehouse office, in the order she had heard it, with the pauses she had heard with the name Warren had said, and the specific way he had said it, and the final sentence about Aaron Briggs, and the flat certainty in Warren's voice when he said, "Neither will she be." She said it the same way she had said it to herself in the dark for 3 weeks. Not the way a child rehearses a performance, but the way a person rehearses a thing they cannot afford to get wrong. Precisely, completely, without a single omission. When she finished, the cab was very quiet. Shepard had not written anything down. He had simply listened. He looked at her. "You've been carrying that for 3 weeks," he said. "Yes." "By yourself?" "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. He did not reach for a comfortable response. He did not manufacture warmth to fill the space. "That is one of the hardest things I've ever heard of a person doing," he said. Not effusively, not with the performance of admiration, just stated the way true things are stated. Riley looked at him. Something in her face moved slightly, the way things move when they have been held rigid for a very long time, and a small amount of pressure is finally carefully released. "I knew I'd only get one chance to say it to the right person," she said. "I didn't want to waste it." Shepard looked at her for a long moment. "You didn't," he said. At 10:53 in the morning, Warren Gould was in his kitchen making scrambled eggs. He was wearing reading glasses and a flannel shirt, and had the morning news on the radio, not the television. The radio, the specific old-fashioned habit of a man who had grown up in timber country and seen no reason to change it. He had a wooden spoon in his hand and grease in the pan and 2 eggs broken, and was moving with the patient, deliberate pace of a man who has no particular reason to hurry, who has built his world with sufficient care. That urgency is no longer a regular requirement. He looked up when the knock came. 4 of them at the front door. Cole, Hardane, Cypher with a laptop and a portable drive. And a man Warren didn't recognize older, with the bearing of someone accustomed to a particular kind of institutional authority, who turned out to be a retired judge from Fort Smith, who rode on weekends and was occasionally useful in exactly this kind of situation. Warren opened the door. The reading glasses were still on. The wooden spoon was still in his hand. He looked at the four of them for exactly 3 seconds, and then the smile came up, the measured, unhurried smile that had been opening doors for him for 25 years. "Gentlemen," he said, "what can I do for you?" The first face came in smoothly. The shoulders relaxed, the hands opened, the head tilted at the fractional angle that signals approachability, the short self-deprecating laugh that invites rapport. He was already moving toward a filing cabinet in the hallway, saying he could show them the documentation, saying he had known Diane for almost a year, saying whatever she may have told them, she had been under significant stress, saying he had done everything he could to help her situation. Cole let him finish. Then Cole said very quietly, "What does the name Aaron Briggs mean to you?" 1 second. It was only 1 second. The smile stayed in place, but something behind Warren Gould's eyes moved to another place, fast, private. The specific internal movement of a man running calculations he has run before, in situations he has managed before, reaching for the machinery he has always been able to rely on. Then the smile was back. But the second had happened. All four of them had seen it. The second phase came in fast. The charm dropped like a coat falling from a hook. The shoulders came up. His voice had not lost its control, but the temperature had changed, and the unhurried quality was gone. And what replaced it was the stripped-down version of the same authority, the version that dispenses with pleasantness, because pleasantness has stopped being useful. He said they were on his private property. He said that was trespassing. He mentioned the sheriff's department. He said he had an attorney he could have on the phone in 4 minutes. He said if they thought a motorcycle club threatening a public servant in his own home didn't come with legal exposure, they were welcome to find out. Cole said, "You're welcome to call your attorney. The FBI is going to want to talk to them anyway." The word landed. Warren Gould went still. The stillness of a man who has encountered a variable he did not expect, running the implications with the rapid, practiced efficiency of someone who has been managing unexpected variables for a very long time. The third phase was quieter. The bluster was gone. What replaced it was softer, and somehow worse, the way things that have shed all performance are sometimes worse than the performance itself. His voice dropped. He talked about the community, about the time he had given, about the fundraising and the watch rotation and the food bank board, and the 20 years of himself he had put into this town. His eyes were not focused on them. They were somewhere internal, going through the same rooms he had furnished and arranged over 25 years, and finding them for the first time insufficient. Cole said 7 words, quiet, absolute. "I'm not interested in your reasons." He paused. "Neither is she." The fourth phase was the only honest moment in the entire conversation. Warren Gould stopped talking. Not gradually, the way conversations wind down. All at once, the way a machine stops when you cut the power. The charm and the legal threat and the sympathy bid all ceased simultaneously. And what was left underneath was not remorse and not defiance. It was the specific hollow exposure of a man who has spent so long operating behind a constructed face that he has forgotten there is something underneath it. And now the face was off, and there was nothing ready to replace it. His hands, which had been open, closed. He looked at the floor. Cole looked at Hardin. Hardin nodded once. He took out his phone and made the call he had been ready to make since 6:45 that morning. The call to the state investigator he had known for 12 years. The one he had been walking through every document and every dollar figure for the past 2 hours, until the investigator had said, "We're coming." 3 minutes later, Two Arkansas State Police vehicles pulled into Warren Gould's driveway. Warren asked once very quietly as the officers came through the door whether someone could call his neighbor about his mail. Not his attorney, his neighbor, about the mail. The officers read him his rights in his own kitchen in front of the scrambled eggs going cold on the stove. They walked him out to the driveway in handcuffs. The morning news was still on the radio inside, still telling the local news of a county where Warren Gould had been for 25 years. One of the people the morning news described as a pillar. The radio played to an empty kitchen. The wooden spoon was still on the counter. In the support truck, Cypher had not looked up from his laptop through any of this. The work he was doing did not require narration, and he had not provided any. When the state police vehicles came and went and Cole came back to the truck, Cypher set the laptop to the side and picked up 3 additional sheets of paper he had printed while everyone else was watching Warren being walked to the driveway. He put them on the hood of the truck. He stepped back. Cole picked up the first sheet and read it. Then the second, then the third. He held the third one. Hardin came to stand beside him. He looked at the third sheet. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The third sheet was a complete accounting of Crossroads Management Solutions. The full scope of the financial architecture that Warren had built slowly and carefully in the space between civic trust and legal scrutiny. 2 confirmed victims, Aaron Briggs, Diane Voss. A third partial case from 2018 that had not been completed because the intended victim had relocated before the document could be finalized. This was not opportunism. It was a practice. Warren Gould had not built Crossroads Management Solutions for Diane Voss. He had built it long before Diane Voss tested it on Aaron Briggs and refined it into something he intended to continue. The civic infrastructure he had constructed over 25 years. The food bank board and the Little League and the neighborhood watch captaincy and the county radio had not been built for the community. It had been built as a platform, a way of remaining close to vulnerable people and the systems that were supposed to protect them close enough to intercept, redirect, and ultimately exploit both. Hardin looked at the sheet for a long time. Then he looked at Cole. He sat across from me at my brother's dinner table at Christmas of 2021, Hardin said. 6 months after Aaron died, he shook my hand and asked how I was holding up. Cole said nothing. He sat across from me. Hardin said again. The statement did not require a response. Cole understood that some things need to be said aloud not because the listener doesn't already know them, but because saying them is part of how they become fully real, how they move from the place where you have been carrying them alone into the space between 2 people where they can finally be set down. He stood beside Hardin in the cold October air and let it be real. Then he said, "Let's finish it." The FBI arrived at 12:41 in the afternoon. A dark blue sedan, no markings, pulled onto Sawmill Creek Road and parked with the precise, deliberate placement of someone who has arrived at many scenes and has learned that how you park communicates something about who you are and why you are there. The woman who got out was in plain clothes, practical shoes, a face that exhaustion had settled into slowly over a long time, the kind that coffee no longer fully touches. She walked toward Cole without looking at the formation of 97 motorcycles staged along the shoulder, the way someone walks past something that would impress most people when they have already decided not to be impressed. She stopped in front of him. "Special Agent Carolyn Marsh," she said. "Little Rock Field Office. I'm told you have something relevant to an open federal investigation." Cole looked at her steadily. "Depends on what you're investigating." A beat. She held his gaze without blinking. "Crossroads Management Solutions," she said. "A principal named Warren Gould." Cole looked at the men standing nearby, Hardin, Cypher, Shepard, who had come out of the pickup truck when the state police arrived and had been standing quietly at the periphery since. 3 seconds of silence moved between them. The kind of silence that is a complete conversation between people who know each other well enough. Cole turned back to Agent Marsh. How long has your office known about him? She did not look away. 14 months, she said. We've been building a financial fraud case, bank records, shell company documentation, corporate registry cross-referencing across 3 states. She paused. We've been moving carefully because we needed bulletproof. Cole was quiet for a moment. You had 14 months, he said. Not loudly, not with heat, the way you state a fact that contains its own indictment. We got her out in 6 hours. Agent Carolyn Marsh had no good answer for that. She knew it. She did not manufacture one. That at least was honest. She stood in the October cold with the knowledge of 14 months of careful, methodical, legally defensible work, sitting on one side of the scale, and a woman who had nearly died in a forest this morning, sitting on the other, and she did not pretend the scale balanced. Cole said, "One condition before we share anything." She waited. Diane Voss gets a victim advocate assigned before her first official interview. Nobody speaks to her in any official capacity without her requesting it. And her daughter does not enter an official interview room for any reason without the counselor who has been with her today. Agent Marsh looked at him. "That's already standard protocol," she said. "Then we have no disagreement." Cypher brought the evidence to the hood of the nearest vehicle and laid it out one piece at a time with the methodical care of someone who understands that the value of evidence is not in finding it, but in the chain that connects it from discovery to courtroom. The Dex Pruitt text chain recovered from the deleted partition with the recovery timestamp and methodology documented. The Crossroads Management Solutions financial summary with its 47 months of deposit records spanning both victims. The 2 management agreements side by side. Aaron Briggs's and Diane Voss's with the matching clause on page 4 and the matching notarization block beside it. Gerald Fitch's signed statement. The estate transfer authorization 23 days from activation flagged and dated. Agent Marsh moved through the first 3 items with the efficient attention of a professional who has reviewed a great deal of documentation in her career. At the 4th item, she set her pen down. She leaned slightly forward. She picked up the 2 management agreements and held them side by side in the October light. "We had the Crossroads accounts," she said. "We had the shell company structure and the deposit patterns. We didn't have the attorney link." She looked at the matching notarization blocks. If this is authenticated, the scope of the charges changes significantly. She set the agreements down. Aaron Briggs was flagged as a potentially related case 14 months ago. We could not establish the financial architecture connecting him to Gould's operation across both victims. This does. Hardin put a folder on the hood beside the other documents. 38 months of volunteer ledger records from Fire Station 4, he said, showing a $9,400 discrepancy in October of 2022. The volunteer who found it brought it to Gould directly. Within 3 weeks, he received 2 visits from county officials about an unrelated noise complaint and was told by a mutual friend that Gould was concerned about his mental state. He locked the ledger records in his gun cabinet and didn't take them out until this morning. Agent Marsh looked at the folder. She looked at the full spread of documentation on the hood of the truck. Cole watched her face. He had been watching faces in difficult situations for a long time. And what he saw in hers was the expression of someone recalibrating the geometry of something she thought she understood, finding that the shape was larger and older and more deliberate than the model she had been working from. Cole said, "What happens to the estate transfer authorization?" "Frozen as evidence of fraud," Marsh said, still writing. "I'll have the state DA's office file the order this afternoon, before end of business." She looked up. What's in Diane Voss's settlement account at this point is a question for the recovery proceedings. That takes time. But it gets protected today. Today, Cole said. Today. The word had weight. The specific weight of something that had been true for 14 months and was only now on this particular October afternoon being acted on with the urgency it had always deserved. Agent Marsh gathered the documents with clean efficiency and turned to go. Then she stopped. She looked back at Cole. "Mercer," she said. He looked at her. She held his gaze for a moment. "You did right by her," she said. A pause. The kind that means the words landed in a specific place. "That's the job," she said. Then she walked back to the dark blue sedan, and it pulled out onto Sawmill Creek Road, and the October afternoon closed around it, and it was gone. Cole stood by the truck for a moment after she left. The formation behind him was quiet. 97 men, most of whom had driven hours on nothing but a phone call from a brother, standing in the cold Arkansas air without complaint, without theater waiting for whatever needed doing next. He looked at them for a moment. The leather cuts and the road names and the gray hair and the weathered faces and the particular stillness of men who have been in difficult places and found that the difficulty did not break them, but only clarified what they were made of. He thought about what Anchor had said that morning. "We finished this right." He turned to Hardane. "Let's finish it," he said. Dr. Evelyn Pruitt had been running a family practice out of a converted Victorian on the edge of Fort Smith for 19 years. She was 61 years old and had treated farming accidents and mill injuries and things she had agreed on certain occasions not to document with excessive specificity. She did not rattle easily. When Doc walked her through Diane's intake numbers in the parking lot of her practice at 2:17 in the afternoon, she stopped walking. She looked at him. She had the expression of a clinician who has been doing this long enough to know what luck looks like when she's standing in front of it, and what the absence of luck looks like, and exactly how thin the line between them is in certain situations. 4.5 hours of suspension at 41 degrees, she said. She looked at the trailer. "Get her inside." Doc had been in the waiting room for 45 minutes when Dr. Pruitt came back through the door. He had brought two things with him: a bottle of orange juice with a straw, because somewhere on the drive from Millhaven, he had noticed that Riley had not eaten anything since the hot chocolate Anchor had brought her, and that the hot chocolate had gone cold before she finished it. And a granola bar from his kit placed on the side table beside the juice where she could reach it without asking. Riley took the juice without comment. She drank half of it looking at the door her mother had gone through. Shepard sat on her other side. The three of them sat in a row in the waiting room, looking at the door, while the afternoon light moved slowly across the floor, and the distant traffic on Garrison Avenue marked the ordinary progress of a day that had been anything but ordinary. Riley turned the brass key on the paracord between her fingers. She had been doing this for hours. It had become the rhythm of the day, the small grounding repetition of a physical object that meant something, that had always meant something, that was still there, regardless of what else had changed. Dr. Pruitt came through the door. She crossed the waiting room and lowered herself to Riley's eye level, not standing over her, not kneeling formally, but settling into a crouch with the practiced ease of a woman who has had this kind of conversation many times and has long since understood that meeting a child where they are is not a courtesy. It is the entire point. Riley noticed. She always noticed. "Your mom is warming up," Dr. Pruitt said. "Her wrists are wrapped. She's going to sleep for a while because her body has been through something serious and sleep is how it repairs. But she's going to be okay." Riley looked at her for a long moment. The same assessment, the same calibration, the scrutiny of a child who has learned that adults say what they mean to say and also sometimes say what they mean not to say, and that the distance between those two things is where the truth lives. She looked at Dr. Pruitt and found no distance. "Can I sit with her?" Riley asked. "In about 20 minutes, Dr. Pruitt said. She asked for you first thing." Something moved on Riley's face. Not a smile. Not yet. The architecture was not quite there yet. The specific arrangement of features that a smile requires had been reorganized by the events of the past 4 days into something that needed time before it could return to that particular configuration. But the possibility of it was there now. The early suggestion of what a smile was going to look like when Riley Voss remembered how to make one. Dr. Pruitt stood. She looked at Doc. Her voice was very quiet. "Thank you for getting her here when you did." A pause. "Another hour," she said, "and I'd be having a different conversation." Doc nodded. He did not say anything. He had been a medic long enough to know that the ones you get to in time feel different from the ones you don't, and that the difference never stops feeling like something, and that there are no words for it that are not smaller than what it actually is. The 20 minutes passed. A nurse came to the waiting room door and said, "She's asking for you." Riley stood. She looked at Shepard. He said, "I'll be right here." She walked through the door. The room was small and warm and smelled like antiseptic and the particular clean neutrality of medical spaces everywhere. Diane Voss was in the bed with the IV still running, and her wrists professionally wrapped in white gauze, and the color returning to her face degree by careful degree. She was not fully awake. Her eyes were open but had the slow, deliberate quality of someone whose body had been through something serious and was engaged in the full-time work of recovery. When Riley came through the door, Diane's eyes found her daughter's face and stayed there. Riley crossed the room and took the chair beside the bed and sat down. She did not speak. She did not need to speak. She reached out carefully, avoiding the bandaged wrist, and took her mother's hand in both of hers. Diane looked at her. Then Diane looked at the brass key on the blue paracord around Riley's neck. She had tied it there every morning before school for 3 years. She had pressed it once against Riley's sternum each time, and said the same thing she always said because there was a specific fear that lived in her. The fear not of losing things, but of her daughter growing up believing that the world was a place with no doors that opened for her. And the key was the daily physical argument against that fear. "So you're never locked out, no matter what." She looked at the key now. She had been hanging in a forest in the dark. Her daughter had chewed through rope with a nail head and run 2 kilometers in the dark in the fog with no shoes and flagged down strangers on a highway and navigated them through the pines to the clearing and given them a word-perfect account of a conversation she had been rehearsing alone for 3 weeks so that she would not waste it on the wrong person. The key was still there. Diane Voss began to cry, not from pain, not from relief exactly, though relief was part of it. She cried because the thing she had feared most, the specific fear that had lived underneath all the other fears for 9 months, had not happened. Her daughter had not been locked out. The door had opened. An impossible door on an impossible highway in an impossible fog. But it had opened, and Riley had walked through it carrying everything that needed to be carried. And here she was, the thing Diane had been most afraid of, and it had not happened. Riley held her mother's hand carefully and did not say anything because there was nothing to say that the key had not already said. The charges, when the state DA's office began filing that afternoon, ran to 6 counts. Wire fraud, 2 counts of financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, one for Aaron Briggs and one for Diane Voss. Conspiracy to commit murder, supported by Riley's testimony, combined with the recovered Dex Pruitt text chain, tampering with legal documents. Obstruction of justice connected to the routing of Hardin's 2021 inquiry through the Neighborhood Watch Captain's office. Gerald Fitch was charged separately with 2 counts of fraud and document falsification. His attorney had called back within the hour, as Hardin had anticipated. Dex Pruitt was located at a property in Logan County at 3 in the afternoon and taken into custody without incident. He had apparently spent the morning packing a duffel bag and had not finished packing it when the Logan County deputies arrived, which suggested he had known since early morning that the morning had not gone according to plan and had been trying with insufficient urgency to do something about that. The bail figure set for Warren Gould was $1,400,000. The number was not coincidental. It was the closest the judicial system could come in that moment to saying exactly what you took, exactly what this cost. Hardin sat in the support truck with his notebook open and wrote the numbers down. He wrote the charges down. He wrote the bail figure down. Then he closed the notebook and held it in both hands and looked at the dashboard for a long time. Cole came to the truck and leaned against the door. Hardin said, 5 years, at minimum, every time someone got close enough to see it. The radio on his belt told him they were coming. Cole said, not this time. Hardin looked at him. Not this time, he said. The estate transfer authorization, the clause on page 4 of the management agreement that had been 23 days from activating and sending what remained of Diane's settlement to Warren Gould's management trust, was flagged as evidence of fraud and frozen by the state DA's office before 4 in the afternoon. What remained in Diane's account after legal recovery proceedings would take months to fully establish. The fees Warren had taken were documented. The shell company transfers were documented. How much could be recovered and how long it would take were questions for attorneys and accountants and the slow machinery of civil litigation. But the clock stopped. The 23 days stopped counting. For the first time in 9 months, someone official was protecting what was left. The housing arrangement came together in the late afternoon with the quiet efficiency that Anchor brought to every logistical problem, which was the efficiency of a man who had spent 31 years building a network of people who trusted each other and had learned that the most valuable currency in any network is not money, but reliability. He called a woman named Bea Alderman. She was 70 years old, a former nurse, a widow, and she owned a 3-bedroom house in Barling, on the south side of Fort Smith, that she rented at well below market rate to people who needed it without requiring any acknowledgement of the fact beyond the basic obligations of a lease. She had done this 4 times before. She would do it again. Anchor called her at 2 in the afternoon. She said yes before he finished the second sentence. The first month's rent and 3 months of a food and utility fund came from the chapter account. The vote at the Fort Smith clubhouse that morning had taken 4 minutes and ended with every hand in the room going up, not with the performance of solidarity, but with the quiet efficiency of people who have already decided and are only making it official. By nightfall, a separate fund established by the younger members had $2,300 in it from people who had never met Diane or Riley Voss and never would. They had seen a post and they had clicked a button, and the number had grown in the way that small human impulses toward decency grow when a structure exists to receive them. Hardin handled the legal filings with Anchor's oversight. An emergency protective order went in at 3:45 in the afternoon before Warren Gould could arrange a bail hearing. A victim advocate named Cheryl Cates was assigned by 5 o'clock. She arrived at Dr. Pruitt's practice with a folder and a calm voice and did not overwhelm anyone. Later that evening, Doc drove to the house on Sawmill Creek Road. He photographed everything inside before touching anything, then photographed the locked-out building before a locksmith contact of Hardin's opened it. Inside were 4 cardboard boxes of financial documents, Diane's original workers' comp paperwork, and a set of tools that had belonged to Riley's grandfather. The last physical objects of value Diane had possessed, stored there by Warren, and held as leverage she never quite had the occasion to call. Doc loaded everything into his truck with careful precision and drove to the house in Barling and carried the boxes inside and put the tools in the garage. Then he drove back without mentioning it to anyone because it was a thing that needed doing, and he had done it, and that was sufficient. The brothers said goodbye the next morning. Diane was being discharged with the follow-up schedule and Dr. Pruitt's direct number written on a card in her own handwriting. She stood in the hospital corridor looking, if not well, then like someone facing the direction of. Well, the wrist wrapped, the color returned to a level that was close to normal. The weight that would need to come back still absent, but the path toward it now open. She stood in the corridor with Riley beside her and Cheryl Cates on her other side, and she looked at the men who had come. Hardin shook her hand with both of his. He left her his card and a single sentence: anytime you need someone who knows how this system works, you call that number. He looked at Riley when he said it, and Riley looked back at him, and something passed between them, in the way of people who have shared the knowledge of a specific name and what that name cost and what it ultimately meant. Doc stood in front of Riley and looked at her with the steady, unhurried attention of a man who has been in enough emergencies to know that the aftermath matters as much as the event. "You did something very hard," he said, "and you did it right." Riley looked at him. "Will you tell the others?" she said. "Already did," Doc said. Shepard was last. He stood in front of Riley and looked at her in the quiet way he had, the way that said he was not going anywhere and was not in any hurry and had nowhere more important to be than exactly here. "I'm going to check on you," he said, "not in a professional capacity, just as a person who is going to check." He paused. "Is that all right with you?" Riley considered this with the gravity she applied to everything. "Yeah," she said. He gave her a piece of paper with his number. She folded it carefully and put it in her pocket. Cypher stopped beside her on his way out. He was the youngest of all of them, 21, with a face that still sometimes surprised people in rooms that expected a different kind of person. He pulled a scrap of paper from his jacket pocket and held it out. "Anytime," he said. "Seriously, text is fine. I mean it." Riley took the paper. She looked at him for a moment. "Thank you for getting the texts back," she said. Cypher stopped. "How do you know about that?" "Shepard told me." Cypher looked at her for a moment. Then a laugh escaped him, short and genuine, the kind that gets out before you decide whether to let it. He shook his head slowly. "Of course he did," he said, and kept walking. Cole was last in the corridor. He stood a few feet away and looked at Diane and Riley, standing together in the morning light coming through the hospital windows in long pale rectangles. The corridor smelled like antiseptic and industrial coffee and whatever specific thing hospitals smell like, that means you made it. Diane's hand was on Riley's shoulder, careful of the wrists resting there, the way hands rest when they are relearning the ordinary. Riley's hand was at her own neck, holding the key lightly. Cole looked at them for a moment. He thought about Tyler. He thought about him in the way he always did, not with the acute grief of the early years, but with the specific ache of something that has become structural load-bearing, present in everything he built, and every decision he made, and every road he chose to ride, and every child he chose to see when most of the world had decided not to look. Tyler at 8 years old, needing someone to come. Cole on the other side of the world, trusting a system that did not deserve the trust. He could not go back to that road. He had spent 17 years understanding that there was no going back to that road. There was only this one, the one in front of him. Every road that looked like it. He walked to where Diane and Riley were standing. Diane looked at him. She started to say something, the kind of thing people start to say when they owe someone a debt they cannot calculate. Cole shook his head slightly, not dismissively, with the quiet certainty of someone who does not require the accounting. He looked at Riley. She looked back at him with those dark eyes that had seen more than 8-year-old eyes should see, and were beginning slowly to believe that seeing too much did not have to be permanent. "You did good," he said. She held his gaze for a moment. "So did you," she said. Cole walked out through the hospital doors and stood in the October morning. He pulled out his phone. He opened the folder he had been keeping without fully meaning to keep, that had started with a photograph Shepard had texted him in February of the year before, a photograph of a different child, a different situation. One he had gotten to in time, in a different way, on a different road. He scrolled through it. The photographs and the articles and the saved messages and the small accumulated record of situations that had gone differently because someone had been paying attention and someone had shown up. He thought about Tyler. He thought about the weight of the folder. Not only the weight of grief, though that was part of it, but the other weight. The weight of the ones on the list. The weight of what grief put to work is capable of producing. He put the phone in his pocket. He walked to his motorcycle. 3 weeks later, Cole took the long way through Fort Smith without examining why, and he pulled off Garrison Avenue into the neighborhood and idled past the house on Brentwood Street without stopping. It was a Thursday afternoon. The light was doing what October light does in Arkansas, coming in low and gold through the hackberry trees, making everything look more deliberate than it is. The house had window boxes that B. Alderman had planted before handing over the key. Late-season mums, rust and yellow, the particular colors of a season turning toward its end. The front door was open, not ajar, but fully open, screen door shut. The interior visible as a warm rectangle in the afternoon light. Diane was at the kitchen table. She was not doing anything in particular. She had a cup of something, and she was looking out the side window in the unhurried way that people look when they are allowed to look at nothing. Because nothing is required of them at this moment. Not watchful, not anxious, not calculating the cost of anything. Just a woman at a kitchen table on a Thursday afternoon, doing what ordinary people do on Thursday afternoons, which is exist without specific purpose in the ordinary warmth of an ordinary room. She looked like someone who had been allowed to be ordinary. Cole sat on his bike at the curb for a moment. He did not go to the door. Shepard was handling the ongoing support. Cheryl Cates was coordinating with a trauma therapist in Fort Smith. School enrollment for Riley had been processed and confirmed, first day set for the Monday after next. Everything that needed doing was being done by people better suited to it than him. His part was finished. He understood that his part finishing was supposed to feel a certain way, and it did. Not satisfaction exactly, something more complicated and more honest. The specific weight of knowing that what had been taken from these two people could not be simply returned. That healing does not move in a straight line, that the work ahead of Diane and Riley was longer and harder than anything the men on Sawmill Creek Road had done in the fog. He had done what he could do. The rest belonged to them. He pulled back onto Garrison Avenue and let the bike find its pace, the easy, familiar weight of a machine he had been riding for 26 years, the road opening ahead in the October afternoon. He was still paying attention. 4 years later, on a Tuesday afternoon in the community center in Barling, Riley Voss was 12 years old and had the particular unhurried confidence of a person who has learned that being right matters more than being loud. She had been coming to the after-school program at the center since she was 9. In the last 6 months, she had started helping Grace, the coordinator, run it. Not officially, no title, just showing up early and staying late and doing the things that needed doing, which was exactly how she had always operated. There was a girl who had been coming for 3 weeks. Her name was Nora. She was 9 years old, small for her age, and she sat in the corner near the window and did her homework without speaking to anyone. When Grace tried to engage her, she answered in complete sentences that revealed nothing and gave no opening. She ate the snack each session like someone who had learned not to expect it to be there the next time. She had the careful, watchful stillness of a child who has been failed enough times to stop expecting anything but hasn't fully stopped hoping. Because hoping is a hard habit to break, even when the evidence against it is substantial. Riley knew that look. She had worn it for longer than she liked to count. She knew what it felt like from the inside, the combination of exhaustion and calculation, and the hope you can't quite stop having the face of someone who is managing an internal situation that no one around them knows about, the face of someone who has learned that being visible is sometimes more dangerous than being invisible. Riley crossed the room. She did not sit across from Nora. She sat beside her at the same table, slightly apart, so there was no confrontation in the geometry. She opened her own homework. She did not say anything for 4 minutes. Then she said conversationally, without looking up, "The answer key on page 6 has a typo." Nora looked at her page. She looked at Riley's page. She looked at her own answer, which matched Riley's, not the key's. "How do you know?" she said. "I did it 3 times and got the same answer," Riley said. "When you get the same answer 3 times, you can trust it." Nora was quiet for a moment. She looked at the page. She looked at her answer, which was correct, which the key had told her was wrong, which had apparently been wrong this entire time in a way that nobody had thought to tell her. She said, "My name is Nora." Riley said, "I'm Riley." A pause. "The snack next week is going to be the good kind," Riley said. "Grace told me." Nora looked at her for a long moment with careful eyes, the eyes of a child who is deciding whether the person in front of her has earned the next layer of trust, which is a calculation that children who have been failed before make very carefully and very slowly. Then she looked back at her homework. She stayed for an extra hour that afternoon. She came back the following Tuesday. She sat at the same table. Some things start quietly. Most of the important ones do. The brass key was around Riley's neck on the blue paracord. She did not wear it every day anymore. Not out of forgetting, and not out of any desire to put it away. She had simply arrived somewhere in the 4 years since the morning on the highway at a relationship with it that was different from the relationship she'd had when she wore it, because her mother tied it there. She wore it now, on the days when it felt right to wear it, which was more days than not, which was fine. Her mother had tied it there every morning for years. She had pressed it once against Riley's sternum each time and said the same thing. "So you're never locked out, no matter what." The key had meant one thing when her mother said it. It had meant something different during the 40 minutes with the nailhead and the rope. It had meant something different again when she had stood on State Highway 27 in the dark in the fog and looked at the headlights of 4 approaching motorcycles and decided. Now it meant what survive things eventually mean. Not that it didn't happen. Not that it was survivable because it was small. It happened. It was large. And it was not the last thing. It was not the last thing.